Tonight was supposed to be a promise kept, a vineyard wedding under lantern light, a family ready for joy. But one kiss turned a carefully curated lie into a flashing camera shot seen by everyone. A fake girlfriend with a real name, an ex who came to wound, not to toast, and a projector that chose violence over vows. Stay with me. In this story, a man who hid behind an invented Emma is forced into the open by Sophie Park, the only person in the room brave enough to choose truth when it hurts. What started as a rescue becomes a reckoning, and the past walks in wearing a smile. Before we begin, if you care about stories where betrayal meets consequence and truth costs something, subscribe to Cheating Stories 7. Leave a like to help more people find this video, and tell me in the comments, would you have played along for 2 minutes to save a grandmother's heart or exposed the lie on the spot? All right, let's step into Silvercrest, where a single kiss exposed everything. Silvercrest Valley shimmered beneath lanterns and polished wine glasses, the kind of night where appearances mattered more than oxygen. Evan Ward stood in the middle of it all, buttoning his tie as if it could hold together a story that had unraveled long ago. For 2 years, he had survived family gatherings by invoking a phantom woman, Emma. Emma who adored Labradors. Emma who always worked late shifts. Emma who was just one flight away. Emma who had never existed. The lie had calcified, turning holidays into polite interrogations answered with fiction, until tonight, when his grandmother, Ruth, decided the curtain must finally fall. Emma or else, Ruth had declared, her cane striking stone like a gavel. At Raylan Carter's wedding, under chandeliers strung across the vineyard, Ruth was prepared to expose his bachelorhood to every guest with a single tap of her cane. Evan had endured pity before. What he couldn't endure was Ruth's disappointment, a look that could undo a man more thoroughly than a divorce decree. The photographer drifted toward their table, camera swinging like a scythe. "The bride wants a shot of you and Emma," he said casually, as if Emma were standing right there polishing her champagne flute. The table fell into silence. Aunt Patty froze mid-gossip, lipstick gleaming like a stop sign. His mother Claire folded her napkin with surgical precision, the same gesture she used when bracing for a family scandal. And Ruth's eyes lit up like a queen who already sensed victory. "Go fetch her, dear," Ruth ordered. Panic wasn't a scream. It was a chill in the hands, a widening in the chest, a split-second clarity that he had run out of road. He could confess. He could end the charade, endure the humiliation, and let the pity seep in. Or he saw her. A woman in a midnight blue dress stood at the dessert table. Auburn hair swept into an effortless knot, her shoulders back as though she owned every whisper in the room. She looked neither eager nor careless. She looked alert. That was what caught him. Alertness, not beauty. Eyes that measured before they gave. Before sense could catch him, he crossed the floor. 20 steps, then 14, then 6. His shadow fell over the cheesecakes, and she turned. Their gazes met, and Evan said her name as if it had always belonged to her. "Emma." The lie breathed again, reckless and alive. She blinked, confusion knitting her brow, lips parting in refusal. But desperation makes fools fast. Evan leaned in and kissed her. It should have been quick, a polite fiction, a camera-saving gesture. Instead, it was fire. The scent of jasmine cut with citrus, the shocking warmth of her mouth, the lightning strike of being kissed back just for a heartbeat before she shoved him away. Plates rattled, flashes erupted. "There she is," Ruth crowed, her joy carrying over the music. The woman wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, eyes blazing with controlled fury. "Explain, now." Evan's voice rasped from somewhere outside himself. "Please play along for 2 minutes, or my grandmother's heart will break watching my life collapse." The family closed in, a tide with questions sharp as coral. Patty demanded how they met. Claire clasped the stranger's hands as if they were long-lost allies, and Ruth finally arrived, her smile outshining the chandeliers. "Finally," Ruth said, "someone who looks at you like the world is worth trying again." But the woman did not yet. She inhaled, then spoke with unnerving poise. "I consult on wine, mostly Burgundy." The lie stretched, reshaped, solidified, heads nodded. Patty declared it destiny. Claire exhaled relief. Ruth pressed the woman's hand with blessing disguised as affection. Across the lawn, under glowing string lights, Marcus Hale, the cousin with a detective's patience, watched them like prey stepping into a snare. When the photographer asked for a pose, Evan hovered his hand near her back. She granted him a fractional nod, consent on loan. The camera clicked. Somewhere a cork burst and guests cheered as if joy could be bottled. When the moment ended, she did not step away. Instead, she held his gaze and delivered her final verdict for the night. "I need your real name." Evan Ward," he whispered. "And you?" She let silence sharpen into suspense before answering. "Sophie Park, not Emma, not anyone's invention." She glanced at the family table, already weaving this lie into legacy, then leaned closer. "All right, Evan Ward, 2 minutes, use them well." And as she said it, a voice behind them sliced the night like a blade wrapped in silk. "Well," the voice purred, "isn't this charming?" Evan froze. He knew that voice. The one woman he thought was gone forever, Amelia. The crowd thinned as the jazz quartet slid into something elegant, the kind of song that makes secrets feel inevitable. Evan guided Sophie to the edge of lantern light, trying to buy honesty with mercy. He told her about the phantom Emma, about how pity calcified into matchmaking, about panic that made him reach for the nearest myth. "You chose the wrong person," Sophie said, her voice even, her gaze unreadable. "Or maybe the right one." A voice cut in, low, lacquered. Lethal, Amelia Thorne stepped into the glow like a blade finding daylight. The satin of her dress snared the string lights and returned them as warning. She looked exactly as Evan remembered and nothing like he needed. Ice blue eyes that cataloged weakness, posture that shrank apologies down to toys. "I do adore reunions," she purred, offering Sophie a smile that never touched her eyes. "Emma, was it?" The name grated like glass in Sophie's mouth. Her grip on her clutch whitened her knuckles. "Sophie," she corrected, loud enough to baptize the nearby tables in truth. "I'm Sophie Park." Evan's stomach pitched. Amelia's mouth curved, savoring the moment, prey daring to declare itself. "Of course you are," she said smoothly. "Sophie the sommelier. I remember you at that private tasting in the city, memorable palate." Her gaze flicked down to Sophie's midnight dress, then up to Evan's hand still hovering, hesitant, near her back. "So tell me," Amelia asked, voice sugar-dipped poison, "how long has our engineer of fictions been courting the truth?" Sophie answered before Evan could stumble. "Long enough to know what he's afraid of," she said calmly, "and long enough to recognize when someone walks in not to celebrate, but to wound." The line landed like a wine glass set down too firmly. Amelia's eyes brightened by a single dangerous degree. "He wounds himself just fine," she murmured. The quartet faltered into silence, leaving the night on a cliff edge. Out on the lawn, Ruth's laughter drifted, blissfully oblivious as Raylan tapped a mic. "Everyone meet Evan's girlfriend." 50 faces turned at once, expectation clattering like silverware. Sophie could either run or seize the narrative. She chose fire. Taking the mic with steady hands, she spun a story from threads Evan hadn't given her. "We met at a coffee shop," she said, eyes soft as if picturing steam. "He made a terrible joke about study guides for Burgundy. I forgave him with a croissant bribe." Laughter rippled. "He insists it was fate. I insist it was pastry." The crowd melted into relief, Aunt Patty dabbing tears, Uncle Bob whooping like romance had been restored to its rightful throne. Ruth clasped her hands in joy, and the photographer lunged forward, smelling spectacle like rain. But Amelia didn't laugh. She watched Sophie the way a locksmith watches hands, calculating, waiting for the slip. "Adorable," she murmured. "But tell them the part about honesty." Sophie didn't flinch. "Honesty is not vomiting every fear into the middle of someone else's celebration," she said, her voice carrying. Her eyes cut to Amelia for a heartbeat, then back, quick as a scalpel. "Sometimes honesty is knowing which truths heal and which were designed to do damage." A muscle twitched in Amelia's jaw. Her fingers toyed with her phone, screen face down like ambition overhearing. "Designed," she echoed. "So clinical. Did you tell her how clinical you were when you built Emma? A brace for the soft parts." Her voice dipped lower. "You and I were supposed to be soft parts together." Sophie lifted her chin. Past tense is doing a lot of work there. Amelia's smile sharpened. I'm fluent in tenses, especially future. She mouthed later. Marcus Hale had drifted closer, orbiting like a satellite, his detective's patience cutting through champagne fog. Claire intercepted him with canapes, trying to distract suspicion with smoked salmon. Marcus accepted the plate but never shifted his eyes from Amelia. Raylan, glowing and oblivious, looped her arm through Sophie's. Come meet the florist who saved my bouquet, she chirped, then turned to Amelia. You must be from yoga. Amelia's lips curved into social camouflage. We stretch together, she said sweetly, her tone making stretch sound like strangle. They moved as a constellation, Raylan pulling, Evan guarding, Sophie balancing grace with exits, Amelia buzzing between them like a live wire. Sophie kept asking questions about peonies, about lemon curd, about Rieslings, building goodwill like sandbags against a coming flood. Amelia let her spin charm before dropping ice. Sophie, she mused, voice casual poison, was it Portland you were commuting from? Or did Emma relocate when Evan's lies needed shorter flights? The nearby circle froze, polite smiles tightening into razors. Evan started to speak, but Sophie touched 2 fingers to his sleeve. Don't. Work takes me where the bottles are, she said evenly, then turning to Evan with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. And some people take me where the music is. The guests laughed again, crisis diffused. A waiter passed champagne. Amelia plucked 1 flute, studied the bubbles, and didn't drink. Careful with music, she said softly. It makes people think they are in a movie when they are really in a lesson. She tilted the rim toward Sophie, and lessons end with tests. Then I'll study, Sophie replied, still smiling. She pivoted toward cousins and asked which vintages paired with Ruth's blueberry pancakes. In seconds, the Mitchells were cheerfully arguing about breakfast wine, Sophie standing in the center like the calm eye of a storm. Evan watched with awe and dread. Sophie wasn't just covering for him, she was shielding his family from Amelia's poison. But Amelia's thumbs moved once over her phone, subtle as a blade unsheathed. Marcus noticed. He didn't stop her. He simply checked the time. The quartet resumed, the music light and dishonest. Ruth drifted by, patted Sophie's cheek, and decreed, "You'll sit by me for cake." Sophie nodded, surprising herself with how natural it felt. Amelia stepped back into their orbit, smile now so cold it fogged the glass she still hadn't drunk from. Well then, she said, her eyes locking on Evan, since we're being generous, let's share history, too. Why don't we tell them what really happened 3 years ago? Who left whom, who preferred adventure to vows? Sophie's voice cut clean. That's your story, tell it if you must, but not here. She nodded toward Raylan, radiant and fragile. This day doesn't belong to your wounds. Amelia's eyes flicked to the bride, then to the waiting projector by the cake. Calculation flared like lightning. You're right, she said lightly. This isn't the room. Relief fluttered through Evan's chest, foolish, premature. Amelia's smile lengthened. It's just the trailer. Raylan clapped, oblivious, calling everyone to the terrace for photos and speeches. The projector hummed to life, waiting for its role. Sophie handed the mic back to the DJ with a graceful bow. But when her eyes met Amelia's, she caught the faintest flicker there. Anticipation disguised as serenity, satisfaction braided with spite. Later, Amelia had promised, and as the projector screen flickered, Sophie realized later was already here. Family photos blurred into a carousel, arms thrown around shoulders, mouths pulled into obedient smiles, the photographer chanting rotate, rotate, until every image looked less like joy and more like evidence. Evan learned the delicate choreography of touching Sophie like a partner while knowing she could end him with a single sentence. She played along too well. Easy laughter, eyes steady, answers wrapped in the polish of someone used to surviving scrutiny. He hated how much he liked it, the way her presence muted the static in his head like a hand calming a frantic metronome. During the couple's dance, Sophie's fingers rested against his shoulder, light but intentional. Her perfume, jasmine threaded with citrus, brushed against him, stirring the part of him that still wanted softness. Why invent Emma? She asked, their steps sliding under a halo of lanterns that made everyone appear kinder than they were. The morning after Amelia left, he said, I felt like a renovation project people couldn't wait to patch, pity, advice, blind dates. Emma was a brace, something to stop the walls from bowing. His eyes drifted toward Ruth's laughter, Claire's napkin folded into nervous geometry. It got easier to keep the brace than to admit the house could stand alone. So you built a wall, Sophie murmured. It kept people from pressing the bruise. He let out a laugh that cracked like old wood. And then I forgot how to take it down. The music thinned, applause swelled, and Marcus Hale appeared, materializing the way only good detectives can, polite enough not to alarm, sharp enough to make escape impossible. Sophie Park, he said smoothly. You consult in Burgundy, interesting. Your Yelp footprint says San Francisco, not Portland. Sophie didn't blink. Wine travels, she said lightly. So do I. Marcus tilted his head, shelving the detail in his orderly mind. Fair enough. His voice carried the quiet of a guardrail, unnoticed until you leaned too close to the edge. Then the night shifted. A groomsman burst in from the terrace, phone held aloft, face the color of paper left too long in the sun. Raylan, he gasped, voice scraping raw, you need to see this. The quartet cut off mid-bar. Conversations faltered into silence. Raylan, radiant still in her bridal glow, turned toward him, confusion tugging at her mouth. See what? The Ave, he panted, already rushing toward the projector meant for childhood montages and college nostalgia. Somebody cued a file. The DJ frowned, tapping furiously at his laptop. A low buzz crawled from the speakers, metallic, sour. Ruth's smile stuttered, Evan's pulse sank. Panic had a scent, and he could smell it rising like ozone before a storm. The projector blinked awake. At first only static and a green timestamp filled the screen. Then a hotel room. Sleek, anonymous, its modern furniture too sterile to belong to Silvercrest's vineyard charm. The bed unmade in a way that spoke of immediacy. A man stepped into frame. Derek. The crowd inhaled as one. A fork clattered to the floor. Aunt Patty's lipstick-slick mouth opened and closed like she'd bitten glass. Claire whispered no as if denial could rewind clocks. Somewhere a child asked if the movie had started. Then came the woman, blonde hair, black dress, a laugh too intimate for strangers. Amelia. The temperature collapsed. Air grew thin, then sharp. Raylan pressed her hand to her mouth as if trying to keep her lungs from falling out. Turn it off, she said, but her voice broke like glass dropped on marble. I'm trying, the DJ muttered, pounding useless keys, but the video had its own will. On screen, Derek leaned close, his grin damning him as clearly as DNA. Amelia's smile was sharper, performative, merciless. The timestamp cornered hope with the efficiency of a trap last night, hours before the vows. Someone whispered, it could be old, but the green numerals murdered the excuse instantly. Evan's stomach hollowed. He felt Sophie's hand grip his sleeve, steady and precise, anchoring him against instincts that wanted to reach backward into history. Marcus had gone statue still, the stillness of a predator about to strike. Raylan staggered a step away, her train dragging like it belonged to another woman. Derek's voice cracked from the crowd, pleading, useless. Ruth's cane clicked once against stone, her spine straightening with a queen's refusal to bow. Kill the feed, Marcus said evenly, and the DJ yanked a cord. The screen sputtered, then returned, crueler for the interruption. Derek's hand sliding to Amelia's hip. Amelia whispering something that bent him forward like a dog to a master. The wedding dissolved into silence, the kind that changes people forever. Sophie's hand slipped from Evan's sleeve, leaving behind only the warmth of her steadiness and the demand that he stand on his own. He scanned the crowd. Ruth caught his eye, chin lifted, eyes wet, and shook her head once, not denial, but command, do, not, run. Then Amelia leaned toward the lens, her palms spread, blocking the shot in a gesture that might have been flirtation if it weren't evidence. For a moment, the screen filled with her hand, creases, lifelines, skin made stadium-sized. The image should have ended there. It didn't. The file rolled forward. The sound system caught Amelia's voice, lower, unmistakable. He'll never know. Gasps ripped through the guests. Raylan stumbled, nearly collapsing, and Marcus lunged forward, not to help her but to see. Sophie whispered under her breath, words meant for herself but audible to Evan. This wasn't sabotage, this was a countdown. The screen froze on Amelia's smirk, timestamp blinking like a heartbeat, and the projector, with dreadful inevitability, cued the next clip. Screams split the air. Raylan's sharp and breaking, Patty's guttural, and one thin, feral cry Evan realized was his own before he strangled it back. The video hadn't needed to be explicit. Derek's jaw, Amelia's laugh, signatures burned into retinas. Someone finally killed the projector, but the damage remained. A white screen humming in the night like a shroud stretched across the ruins of a celebration. Derek sputtered first, words spilling like receipts from a broken register. That clip is out of context. This is a setup. Amelia was only... Each sentence collapsed under its own weight. He lunged for Raylan's hands, caught only air. His panic looked new, the desperation of a man who had never rehearsed losing. Amelia didn't move. She stood unnervingly still, the way predators freeze when the trap they built snaps closed on the wrong limb. Her ice-blue gaze swept the wreckage, calculating which story to spin, which witness to silence. "How could you?" Raylan gasped, stumbling backward. Her train snagged on a chair leg with a sound like silk, realizing it was mortal. Patty rushed forward, lipstick bright as a flare, bracing Raylan before she fell. Phones lifted, some recording, some hesitating, shame and spectacle wrestling in the same breath. Guests became both audience and paparazzi, the choreography of scandal arranging them into half-steps and gasps. Amelia's voice carried across the ruin, unhurried. "You were always afraid of truth, Evan," she said, as if narrating a wine tasting instead of a funeral for trust. "Consider yourself cured." Before Evan could answer, Sophie stepped into the space like a blade unsheathed. "No," she said, "consider yourself exposed." Her breath hitched once, then steadied. Derek wasn't Amelia's only extracurricular last night. The air buckled, dozens of heads snapped toward her. "Check the timestamps," Sophie continued, her voice cutting clean. 2 hotel entries, 2 room charges on Derek's keycard. A second exit at 3:12 a.m. different floor. He didn't cheat once. He covered one betrayal with another. The sound system fizzed and died as if refusing to score this collapse. Derek barked a laugh, high, brittle. "That's insane. You don't know." "How do you know that?" Marcus had already moved closer, phone out, eyes sharp with professional hunger. His tone didn't flatter. It audited. Sophie didn't flinch. "Because I was asked to audit the venue's cellar this morning. Their back-of-house logs are sloppy, so are their cameras." Her gaze speared Amelia. "You wanted spectacle. You forgot where the mirrors are." A ripple rolled through the guests, gossip mutating into storm. The banquet manager appeared, face gray, muttering about sorting things privately. A headset-wearing coordinator flapped her clipboard like it could hold back fire. Derek staggered toward Raylan. "It was a mistake. I was drunk. It didn't mean anything." Raylan's reply was soft but honed. "Which part? The first mistake or the second? Tell me which betrayal didn't mean anything so I can file it properly." Ruth stepped between them, lavender jacket trembling at the seams. One hand gripped Raylan's shoulder, the other shook minutely, a contained earthquake. "Breathe, sweetheart," she said, half command, half mercy. Claire strode to the DJ and pressed his hands flat over the controls. The screen winked to black. It didn't matter. The images had already carved themselves into memory. Amelia tilted her head, calm as a hawk. "I didn't load the file," she said almost reasonably. "But hiding is a waste of time." Her gaze cut to Evan. "Truth always finds the loudest room." "Truth doesn't need sabotage," Sophie shot back. "Sabotage needs truth to look respectable." Marcus was already typing. "Duplicate charges, access logs, I'll find them." He didn't look at Derek, he looked at the manager. "You keep video for liability, yes?" The manager nodded the way men nod at cliffs. Derek snapped at Sophie, voice stripped raw. "You don't know me, stay out of my marriage." Sophie's answer was calm, surgical. "Then you should have stayed in it." The silence that followed was a bridge too narrow for anyone to cross. Raylan looked down at her ring as if it were an animal she had raised, only to learn its bite was venom. She slid it off. The sound of metal leaving skin was small, but everyone heard it. She placed it into Ruth's palm. "Keep it," Raylan whispered. "Let it stop meaning the wrong thing." Ruth closed her hand around it, bones making a fist that was more stewardship than anger. "I'll hold it," she said, as if testifying to the past. Guests wavered between fleeing and clinging. A cousin sobbed. A child was ushered away. Uncle Bob tried a joke, then apologized to no one. The quartet abandoned their instruments, silence heavy as a verdict. "Raylan," Derek tried once more, voice shredded. "We can talk, we can." "We will," she said, "but not so you can teach me how to unsee." She turned to the manager. "Call the hotel, ask for security, ask for copies of the access logs." Her gaze found Marcus, "and give my cousin whatever he needs." The manager hesitated. Marcus didn't. His stare was a warrant. For the first time, Amelia's mask cracked, just a flicker, hairline thin. She smoothed it instantly, but Ruth saw. "You," Ruth said, her voice iron wrapped in velvet, "will not confuse my grandson's pain with your entertainment." Amelia's lips curled. "I don't confuse, I reveal." "Then look closely," Ruth answered. Revelations stain the hands that hold them. The vineyard exhaled one ragged breath. Beyond the vines, crickets resumed their rhythm, indifferent to the ruin. Lights buzzed. The untouched cake gleamed absurdly festive. Guests began moving again with the caution of survivors testing rubble. And just when it seemed the night might collapse into ashes, Marcus's phone lit with a new message. He glanced at the screen and his jaw set. "There's more," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "And it doesn't just implicate Derek." Every head turned. The ruin wasn't finished. The family scattered into clusters that looked like shipwrecked survivors, gripping each other not to drown, but simply to remember how to stand. Patty stormed toward the banquet manager, demanding refunds with a voice sharp enough to cut fondant. Claire gathered Ruth into her arms, murmuring about tea, as if hot water and leaves could cauterize wounds. Marcus drew Derek aside. No cuffs, no theatrics. Just one firm hand on an elbow, his calm tone turning excuses into itemized evidence. Minutes later, the police arrived, quiet, almost embarrassed, uniforms creasing the night. The vineyard staff opened a side gate. The officers slipped through like stagehands who hated this act of the play. It turned out one of Derek's other floors was a vendor's suite booked under an employee discount. It turned out the employee was 19. It turned out the hotel had a harassment complaint already drafted, waiting to be buried. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He just kept asking, names, dates, copies. Every answer dragged another brick out of Derek's foundation. Amelia's face never cracked. When the officers asked for her statement, she gave one word, regret, and meant none of it. She didn't look at Raylan. She didn't look at the blank screen still humming faintly like a lie that had lost its courage. She watched Evan instead, with the fascination of a scientist observing an experiment sprout an unpredicted limb. Evan found Sophie alone on the dance floor, her hands flat on the abandoned cake table. The sugar cathedral leaned, its tears like frozen music. A stray eucalyptus leaf clung to the frosting like a comma refusing to end the sentence. "You didn't owe me any of that," he said quietly. "I didn't do it for you." Sophie's eyes shifted toward Raylan, now shielded by ants forming a protective wall with their bodies. "She deserved not to marry a betrayal, and Amelia came here to punish you for a crime you didn't commit." He wanted to tell her she'd been wrong earlier, that kissing her hadn't been the wrong choice at all. Instead, he said, "You just made an enemy with money." Sophie shrugged. "I grew up with debt. Money doesn't scare me." She lifted her palm, a faint scar gleaming under the lights. "Burns do, but money. Just hot air if you know where the switches are." Ruth approached, fragile but upright, lavender jacket turned into a banner of defiance. "You," she told Sophie, "are welcome at my table even if you decide my grandson is a disaster." Sophie smiled for the first time that night, a smile that actually touched bone. "Thank you," she said. Ruth turned to Evan. "Fix what you broke, then come home." One squeeze on his arm, then she moved on, shepherding strays like a farmer still knowing the old whistles. On the terrace, Amelia waited like a thunderhead, string lights behind her making her look holy from far away and dangerous up close. Evan stepped into the storm. You humiliated yourself, he said. And Raylan and that 19-year-old who's going to have to answer questions written by a lawyer. No, Amelia replied evenly. I reminded you what happens when you hide behind inventions. I just picked a bigger screen. You picked collateral, Evan snapped. That isn't truth, that's shrapnel. Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Truth is a blast radius. People standing too close get marked. Her eyes narrowed, grating him. And you, how quickly you reached for another woman to solve a problem you created. I reached for air, Evan said, and found someone who knows how to breathe. Amelia's phone buzzed. She glanced, exhaled a satisfied breath. You should check yours. A well-timed clip does wonders. People always click the word wedding. Evan's phone vibrated like a wasp in his pocket. Preview, groom busted night before nuptials. Tagged at Sophie Park Sommelier. You tagged her, Evan said flatly. The internet loves a heroine, Amelia murmured. Let's see if it loves her when subpoenas start. Lawyers call it discovery, I call it dessert. Sophie appeared behind him, silent until necessary. You think lawsuits will scare me into silence, she said. They won't. She held up her phone, and you forgot to blur the manager's face in your anonymous tip. The hotel's counsel will be very interested in who sent it. Her gaze didn't waver. Truth is messy, but you're not cleaning, you're just playing with broken glass. For the first time, Amelia blinked, then she slid her mask back on. MS, Park, you don't know me. I know what you did at a wedding, Sophie answered. That's enough. An officer approached, notebook ready. MS, Thorne will need a full statement. Amelia's lips parted, calculation flickering, but she let herself be escorted. Marcus reappeared, eyes sharp. The hotel sent the logs. The 19-year-old filed her draft complaint this morning. It was buried, not anymore. He showed Evan his screen. And Amelia sent that clip to 3 gossip accounts under a dummy email. Handle included the word candor. She's always too proud of her own games. Evan felt sick. Sophie only said, start with protecting the 19-year-old. I intend to, Marcus said. Patty stormed by waving contracts like weapons, shouting about refunds, damages, punitive clauses. Claire steered her gently toward water. Guests drifted like ghosts, the quartet long packed up. Silence ruling the vineyard. Evan turned to Sophie. What now? Now we do something boring and brave, she said. We tell Ruth the truth about me, about Emma, before Amelia weaponizes it. Ruth appeared again as if summoned by her own name. The ring in her pocket tugged her steps like gravity. Police will finish tonight, the rest we will tomorrow. She studied them both. Come in the morning, confessions go best with coffee. We'll be there, Sophie said, steady. Ruth's gaze softened. Good, I have a casserole labeled in case of apology. Been saving it for you, Evan. He laughed, wrecked. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know, Ruth said. That's why I'm still here. On the far terrace, Amelia gave her statement, then vanished into the night like weather deciding which town to ruin next. Evan turned to Sophie. Terms of war. Sophie's eyes lingered on the blank screen, the ruins of love, the family reassembling itself. No, terms of rebuilding. She slipped her hand into his, 2 fingers, 1 pulse, a silent vow. Tomorrow we stop letting other people write the story. For the first time since the projector burned them, Evan felt the faint outline of morning, until Marcus's phone buzzed again. He read the message and his expression darkened. The hotel cameras picked up more, he said. This time it wasn't Derek and it wasn't Amelia. The night, already in ruins, tilted further. By morning the wedding was a national joke. A hashtag bloomed like mold, #nuptial night before, feeding off outrage and brunch photos alike. The hotel issued a statement with the polished emptiness of a towel folded into a swan. Deep concern, temporary suspension, commitment to safety. The 19-year-old's name stayed hidden, but her age marched across every headline like a drumbeat. Derek's law firm erased his bio before lunch. Cached versions spread like ghosts no one could exorcise. Amelia? She posted 3 words in white on black. Let truth breathe. Minimalist theater. Confession without content. Marcus didn't decorate. He dug through access logs, angles, timestamps with the grim patience of a man who trusted documents more than performances. By mid-morning, he sent Evan a still. Stairwell concrete, time-stamped 8 minutes after Amelia left Derek's room. She stood alone, mascara streaking, breath fractured into furious sobs. "Why show me that?" Evan asked when Marcus arrived at Ruth's with coffee and a folder heavy as judgment. "Because monsters don't cry," Marcus said. "And she did. Doesn't erase the harm, but it complicates the way you carry it." He tapped the folder. "The 19-year-old goes first. Hotel council is cooperating now that the word pattern has appeared in 3 emails." Gratitude and nausea sat side by side in Evan's chest. Later, he carried 2 coffees and a pocket full of resolve to Sophie's apartment. She opened the door in an oversized t-shirt, hair lit by honest morning. The place smelled of toast and citrus. He held out the cup like an offering. "I'm done being curated by pity," he said. "I'm done with Emma." "You were done last night," Sophie answered, leaning on the counter, sunlight painting her hair gold. "Say the next part. I want to know you without witnesses, not for my family, for me." She let silence stretch, then cut it clean. "Ground rules, we tell Ruth everything. We don't bury Amelia to feel noble. What she did gets called what it is, and you show up when it's inconvenient, not when it makes a pretty picture." He nodded. "And you?" "I stop running when it looks like it might hurt," she said. "I choose the hurt if it's honest." Deal. They told Ruth first. She listened, mug in her hands, eyes bright and proud and sad all at once, like a captain naming storms she'd already mapped. "Truth is still the best wedding gift," she said, "even when it arrives after the cake." She squeezed Sophie's fingers. "You didn't owe us rescue, you gave it anyway, that's family work." Then Raylan arrived, hair in a rough knot, sweatshirt sequined with "not today." She stood straight by force. "I'll like love again when I'm ready," she said. "Make it worth my trouble to watch you two try." Her hug with Sophie made a sound like thread pulling through fabric, the sound of mending. Claire surprised him. No flinch, no lecture, just plates set down with quiet steadiness. "Which Riesling forgives my lasagna if I burn it again?" she asked. Sophie considered. "Off-dry Mosel, acid for tomatoes, sweetness for mercy." Claire laughed, hand pressed to chest, and in that laugh was a mother choosing where to place her worry. Forgiveness didn't arrive as a pardon. It arrived as chairs pulled close, a table made bigger. Patty stormed in waving legal threats, left with Tupperware and a wine recommendation. Uncle Bob cracked a clumsy joke, then offered to drive Raylan to appointments she hadn't yet booked. Marcus texted from the hotel, "Employee has counsel. Logs moving. Keep Ruth seated." That afternoon, Evan and Sophie walked to a park that once felt reserved for other people's certainties. They traded shames like currency, tuxedos gathering dust, deposits forfeited with clinical sympathy, debt that spoke its own language, kitchens where burns became part of the skin. Shared shame added up to something resembling a life. The news cycle spun on, hungry and indifferent. Amelia's "Let Truth Breathe" mutated into memes, parodies, sermons. Marcus's last update came at dusk. Derek suspended, DA circling, gossip blog admin already talking once told lying to a detective was a felony. "Amelia used a proxy," Marcus added. "But she didn't hide from the part she wanted you to see. She wanted to teach you something." "Did I learn it?" Evan asked Sophie. "You learn not to take lessons from people who weaponize truth," she said. "That's enough syllabus." They went back to Ruth's because when the world choose your family, you cook. Ruth reheated the encase of apology casserole and scolded it for being dry so she didn't have to scold her blood. Sophie poured wine and told vineyard stories. Ruth interrupted to ask if the vintner was handsome, and the table's laughter came out sturdy. Allowed to stay, later walking Sophie home, Evan stopped 2 doors short. "I want a promise, but I want to earn it first." "That's the right order," she said. She put a hand over his heart. "If you reach for me to hide panic, I step back. If you reach for me to be known, I step in." "Known," he said, certain. "Then good night, Evan Ward." She kissed him like punctuation that insists on a next sentence. Back in bed, city air humming through his window, he typed messages. "Here when you want the boring parts handled," to Raylan. "Thank you to Marcus. Coffee and confession, round 2. To Sophie. Her answer came fast, yes. For the first time, clean cut made sense. Not painless, just precise. Sometimes precision is mercy. Then his phone lit again, a notification from an unknown number. A new clip, unnamed, uncaptioned. Just a grainy still, a wine cellar door, time-stamped the same night. And someone stepping through it, someone who wasn't Derek. 1 year later, Silver Crest glittered again under lanterns that remembered. Paper moons swaying over the same flagstones where a night once split in half. This time it wasn't a wedding. Raylan hosted a not wedding with dancing anyway, an anniversary of choosing not to marry the wrong person. The place cards were jokes, table, recovering optimists. Centerpieces were mason jars of wildflowers, each tagged not with names but verbs. Mend, risk, stay. The air smelled of cut grass and vanilla cake. The scent of resilience rehearsed until it stuck. Ruth wore lavender again, but this time it was defiance, not defense. Her cane tapped the flagstones like a conductor's baton, summoning laughter before sentiment could sink the room. Marcus arrived with someone he wasn't ready to name, a man in a slate suit whose laugh made strangers lean in. Patty sweet-talked the bartender into inventing a drink she christened the refund but fizzy. Claire floated from table to table, arranging plates with hands that knew peace as fluently as they knew discipline. Evan stood at the edge, Sophie's hand in his. The quartet slid into the way you look tonight. Guests turned toward them instinctively, the way people do when a couple has survived fire and still shows up whole. Between them, ordinary had become complicated, then kind. They'd learned to fight without leaving scars, to apologize without adding interest, to be bored together without fearing the end. He could list every way she'd made him better. She could list every way he'd taught her to choose hurt if it was honest and refuse pain when it was just spectacle. Neither needed to. Their clasped hands told it. Amelia arrived late. Raylan had invited her. She came with less armor, no eyeliner sharp enough to wound, no gown designed for escape velocity. She asked Sophie for 5 minutes. She got 3, by the hedge of white roses that had once seen everything and bloomed anyway. I was cruel, Amelia said, voice rasping where polish used to live. I thought destroying him would stop me from hating myself for leaving. It didn't. Sophie studied her not as a rival, but as a woman finally tired of auditioning for her own role. Your apology won't be currency here, she said, but it can be compost. Something fragile cracked in Amelia's chest. She exhaled. Then I'll plant better. She left before the song ended, not triumphant, not tragic, just smaller, more human, like weather finally choosing where to rain. Ruth nudged Evan toward the dance floor as the photographer raised his camera. Evan didn't need rescue this time. He asked for it anyway. May I? He whispered. Sophie smiled. Yes. He kissed her, no spectacle, no lie, just the ordinary miracle of 2 people who had walked through shrapnel and chosen to stop bleeding on those who hadn't cut them. The flash went off. The picture would look like joy. It would not show the contract underneath. We tell the truth when it costs. Raylan lifted a glass. To the year I didn't marry a headline. Laughter broke like glass into safe pieces. She raised a second. To the 19-year-old who got her day in court, to hotels that finally learned the word pattern, and to families who keep making more chairs. Later, on the terrace, Sophie leaned on the railing, lanterns swinging like shy planets. That first night, she said, eyes tracing the vines, you chose the wrong person. Evan laughed low and certain, and she turned out to be the exact person who wouldn't let you hide. He drew her close, a gesture so unremarkable now that it felt like wealth. I'm not hiding. Good, she said, because I'm about to ask something inconvenient. Say it. Sunday brunch at Ruth's, 40 people, no fictions, we tell it all. The ring Ruth once pocketed sat tonight in a glass shadow box, labeled by Raylan in looping script. What didn't become marriage became proof. Yes, Evan said, then, but add 2 chairs, one for anyone who needs to speak before they are forgiven and one for anyone who needs to eat before they can speak. Sophie considered, then nodded. Deal. Inside, Patty demanded Sophie arbitrate a debate about sparkling wine. Marcus pretended not to hover near his date. Ruth held court with teenagers who adored her chaos as much as her wisdom. Uncle Bob told a joke trimmed of cruelty, and everyone applauded like restraint was the punchline. Claire draped a silk scarf, blue and silver, over Sophie's shoulders. It was waiting before you were. Now it's on time. Sophie touched the fabric, remembering the gift once bought for a woman who didn't exist and given to one who did. That was the second kiss of the night, without lips but steadier. By the hedge, cousins argued breakfast wine again. Sophie called off-dry Mosul without turning, and the circle erupted like it was ritual. When the party thinned to people who stacked chairs without being asked, Ruth found them by the shadow box. "Tomorrow," she said, tapping the glass, "bring your inconvenient truths and your appetites. We don't waste what hurt us. We turn it into furniture." "Tables," Evan asked. "Chairs," Ruth corrected. "Tables tell you where to sit. Chairs tell you you can stay." On the drive home, city lights stitched themselves into constellations of certainty. At a red light, Evan laced his fingers with Sophie's. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd picked the other woman that night?" "No," Sophie said, "because you didn't." Relief came simple. "I love you," he said. "Good," she answered. "Bring that to brunch. We're feeding 40. Morning would bring pancakes stuck in the middle and a Riesling for giving them, Ruth asking indecent questions and getting better answers, a family album with a page titled Repair. It would also bring the quiet, unphotographed work of keeping a promise, showing up when it's inconvenient, telling truth when it costs, kissing the person you chose in a room that remembers when you didn't know how. When Sophie leaned across the console and kissed him again, it wasn't a rescue or a performance. It was a yes echoing itself. If anyone had taken a picture, it would have looked like joy. It would not have shown the contract beneath it. But tomorrow at brunch, they would read it aloud, pass it like bread. And that would be the cleanest revenge of all, not on each other, but on shame, fear, and the kind of cheating that starts with yourself and makes everyone else pay the bill. We began with a lie that looked polite under lantern light, and we ended with a promise that chose daylight over performance. The wedding shattered, but something better survived. A 19-year-old herd, a family that made more chairs, and two people who learned to stop hiding behind the kind of cheating that starts with yourself. Here is the question I want you to answer. Is there ever a good lie, or does every lie demand a public cost eventually? If you were Sophie, would you have protected the room first and told the whole truth later? If this story spoke to you like the video, subscribe to Cheating Stories 7 and share your take in the comments. Your voice helps us keep telling the hard parts with honesty. Thank you for watching. Breathe. Then tell the truth it costs to tell.